So our next speaker is Scott Frost from the Industrial Basse. He's an Industrial Basse Systems Engineer from the Department of Defense IBAS office. Mr. Scott Frost is a distinguished analyst with Nonprofit Analytics Services, Inc. He provides full-time senior staff provides full-time senior staff contractor support to the Department of Defense Industrial Basse Analysis and Sustainment, that's the IBAS, policy and investment program within the Office of the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Industrial Basse Policy. Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition and Sustainment. He serves as a contract support lead for industrial workforce matters in the IBAS program office within the Office of the Secretary of Defense, including the IBAS office's oversight of DoD's National Imperative for Industrial Skills multi-year initiative launched in fiscal year 2020 and comprising a nearly $130 million workforce development investment portfolio. For the past 15 years as an Answer employee, Scott has provided continuous full-time support to OSD across multiple acquisition and industrial preparedness programs, including the DoD Chemical Biological Defense Program and DoD Manufacturing Technology, that's the MANTech program. He was instrumental in OSD's efforts to establish the DoD MANTech program's first 8 DoD-led manufacturing innovation institutes, which comprises of over $1 billion in federal investments as part of the National Manufacturing USA Network. Scott is a retired career military officer from the U.S. Air Force, bringing to Answer nearly 28 years of military command, staff, and operations experience in aviation as a USAF pilot, strategic planning, personnel force management, personnel readiness and joint matters, operational programming, and civil combat engineering, including over 10 years of joint service and major command level staff experience. Scott holds a bachelor's degree and master's degree in civil engineering from the Ohio State University and a master's degree in systems engineering from Stevens Institute of Technology. He is a project management Institute PMI certified project management professional. With that, I'd like to introduce Scott Frost and have him give us his presentation for today.
Well, good morning and thank you for that introduction. Can you hear me okay? I think I heard a yes. So I appreciate that rundown. I'm going to have to share that with my wife. As was said, I am Scott Frost and with Analytics Services, so I'll spare you the repeat rundown. But Adele Ratcliffe, the IBAS program director, who was your principal invitee from this office, is unable to attend this morning, and she does send you her regrets. So I'm filling in for Adele, and I'll do my best to represent her at this important summit that you have pulled together. As was just said, I did spend about a 28-year career in the military as an operator and as a pilot. And since then, since retiring in 2007, I've been with Answer full-time for the last 15 years. I've really enjoyed the marriage with Answer, and it's been a good match for me. And so I do have a background in the industrial preparedness mission area that the Defense Department has mostly for about 10 years, was with the MANTech program. And the highlight of that for me was establishing 8 of the 9 DoD Manufacturing Innovation Institutes that are in the Manufacturing USA Network. And I think that's salient for this summit. For the last 4 years or so, since 2018, I was brought on to the IBAS program by Adele Ratcliffe. And I've been supporting industrial workforce development efforts, all under the umbrella of the National Imperative for Industrial Skills, as was just mentioned. So I will discuss that briefly, and that initiative formally kicked off in March of 2020. But if we could go to the title slide just briefly. And while this presentation is titled and focused as a general overview of the IBAS program, let me say up front that the IBAS office strongly subscribes to the themes of this summit, including digital transformation, adopting Industry 4.0 practices, supply chain optimization amidst a globalized economic framework, and to the extent that defense supply chain health and capacity and resilience are dependent on making that transformation, we in the IBAS office and in the program strongly support the policies and investments that help to incentivize that transformation. So thanks for the invite to this summit. We think it's an important summit, and we think you have a good focus here. And so without further ado, why don't we jump into the presentation and go to the next slide. So I want to start with a focus on the Office of Industrial Base Policy. And the statement on the IBP website, which is at the top of this slide, really captures what the Office of Industrial Base Policy strives to ensure in partnership with industry and with the broader private and public domains. The quote at the bottom was one that I just pulled from the just released 2022 National Security Strategy. And I think that's an amplifying use case to use Ukraine and the war in Ukraine, which to highlight the criticality of a vibrant defense industrial base, the importance of resilience, the importance of capacity, the importance of and the ability to pivot and surge as conditions evolve. So it's a great use case to highlight the importance of industrial-based policy and the need for the Defense Department to have a dedicated organizational focus on that and the nimbleness that's needed in the industrial base. So if you can go to the next slide, and I'll apologize up front for hitting you with, a big wiring diagram. I mean, if we're good at anything in the Defense Department, we're good at reorganizing. And so I say that tongue in cheek, but we have experienced a lot of reorganization in the industrial base policy world, and for the good, I would say. So I do want to spend just a little bit of time focusing on this diagram, and just keep your eyes trained to the center column, basically. So the assistant secretary, I should give you just a little bit of history that you're probably all very familiar with, and that is the breakup of the Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition Technology and Logistics that was spearheaded by some Senator McCain legislation that broke up AT&L into two undersecretariats because of a span of control problem that Congress thought the department had. It was a double-edged sword, but there is goodness here. So on the one hand, the industrial policy functions, in industrial base policy functions, it's kind of, the baby was unfortunately split in certain ways, especially when you think about manufacturing, where a lot of the manufacturing functions and manufacturing technology went to the Research and Engineering Undersecretariat, and the acquisition and sustainment mission, acquisition policy went to the Undersecretary for Acquisition and Sustainment, which this Industrial Policy Office, now Industrial Base Policy Office, lines up under. So we do have to work the interfaces very closely with the research and engineering community. But the ASD for Industrial Base Policy, which is now the name, is led by Ms. Deborah Rosenblum. She's performing the duties, so she's temporarily in the position until we get a permanent hire, but she's doing a marvelous job. And the her deputy, Mr. Mike Vaccaro, was performing the duties. He's now, you can strike the PTDO from that acronym, and he's now permanently in that seat. But as part of all of that reorganization that started with the AT&L breakup, we now have the good news of the Industrial Policy Office, which was a deputy assistant secretary that direct reported to the AT&L, is now an assistant secretary. That's a big deal. That is a big deal change in the Defense Department, where the industrial policy apparatus and the enterprise has been raised in significant stature to an assistant secretary of defense that is now a direct report to the ANS, the Acquisition and Sustainment Undersecretary. And that created the opportunity for two deputy assistant secretaries. So staying in the middle column, the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Industrial Base Resilience, Ms. Hamila Najib Locke, who was recently installed permanently, is now that DASD. And that I consider to be kind of the heartbeat of the Industrial Base Policy Office. And there are now 3 directorates within the DASD for Industrial Base Resilience. And I want to focus on the one where the IBAS office is with the green box. And we're under the Director for Industrial Base Support, which in shorthand would be the major investment lines that support industrial base policies. So the Defense Production Act Title III program and the IBAS program are the 2 big investment lines within IBP. So I think, the other good news that I want to tell you is with this growth in stature in industrial policy, the IBAS office itself has experienced a step change in investment funding levels. And with that is significant growth in the office. So Adele Radcliffe used to be the only federal civilian in the office. We now have 3, at least they are detailees, but they are federal detailees. We have Jamie White, who's her new deputy, Brian Mitzdorfer, who came from, Jamie White came from Aviation and Missile Command at Huntsville in the Army. Brian Mitzdorfer from the Navy, Naval Surface Warfare Center Crane, and he's now our CTO, Chief Technology Officer, and Kevin Wallace from DevCom Chem Bio Center is now the acquisition lead in the office. They are detailees, but they're here for at least a year, if not more. And so we're working to perhaps permanentize some of those billets and again, bring the IBAS office up to keep it up with the size of the investment and policy profile that we're managing. So enough on this chart. Feel free to shoot me a question if you have any more about it, but I wanted to give you kind of the laydown of where we are. And so now if you could go to the next slide, and I'm hopping around a little bit thematically. I think it's important that we do a quick stop on Executive Order 14017 that the Biden administration released in February of 2021, because the title is America's Supply Chains. And it is a sustaining focus and framework across the IBP enterprise. So we now have a framework that we're operating against and some thrust areas. So I think that's very important. So the report on the left was that first high-speed 100-day report that was led by multiple agencies within the federal government. You know, semiconductors were overseen by Department of Commerce. Strategic and critical materials was the Department of Defense lead, batteries and storage, Department of Energy, pharmaceuticals with Health and Human Services. So that came together in a quick 100-day report that laid in some key findings and immediate actions. And so then that arrow to the right led to what became the 1-year report that the Defense Department put out in support of EO 14017. And at the bottom, that graphic, it graphically captures what is now a guiding framework for the Defense Department, where you've got these 5, supply chain resiliency focus areas built around battery storage or batteries and storage, microelectronics, castings and forgings, strategic and critical materials, and then select kinetic capabilities, including hypersonics and some other technical areas. So, and we are literally following that roadmap as a department. And then you've got these big crosscutters that the report identified that are called strategic enablers: cybersecurity, a focus on small businesses and always giving small businesses opportunity to thrive against many of the barriers that they face. Manufacturing as a theme, manufacturing technology, and just basic traditional manufacturing needs of the nation and the Defense Department. And then workforce, which we hear over and over, is a continuous and deep a challenge area brought on by the dynamics of the baby boomer retirements, offshoring of manufacturing capability, and an atrophy of workforce development pipelines, primarily supporting the industrial skills. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. So if we could go to the next slide, we're going to hop back to a little bit more about the organization. IBAS works underneath the Office of Industrial Base Support. And so you see kind of the mission statement of Industrial Base Support. And it's kind of a three-legged stool. Two of those legs are the big investment lines that I talked about that I'll get to at the bottom of the slide. But the first thing I want to talk to is the Defense Production Act Title I authorities, which you likely are familiar with, which is it authorizes the president to ensure availability of to United States and Canadian industry to U.S. defense needs, and we provide essential, defense supply chain priorities through the Defense Priorities and Allocation System. And you've all likely heard of DX-rated and DO-rated programs, where they are coded in such a way that those supply chains give priority to our defense and national security needs. So the DPA Title I program is handled within the Industrial Base Support Office. And then we get to the two key investment authorities, DPA Title III and Industrial Basse Analysis and Sustainment. So together they are a very complementary and flexible pair of authorities. IBAS, which I will now devote the rest of this presentation to, is a very powerful and flexible authority of RDT and investment funds, and I'll talk to that more. Defense Production Act Title III gets to the assured capacity of certain supplies and components where there isn't necessarily, or there may not be, a strong market case to sustain it. So the government has to roll in and provide some kind of sustaining incentive or sustaining funding to help ensure that these areas where there isn't a strong market case, but there's a strong defense need, creates that assured capacity, that assured capability. So these are know-your procurement funds, and it does require presidential authorization before you can run funds through that program. So that's industrial base support. So now if we could go to the next slide, and now let's focus in on the IBAS program itself, which is kind of the center of gravity of what I want to talk to you about, even though I'm also representing the Defense Department. So, I'll expand the aperture to all DoD needs in terms of industrial preparedness. But the IBAS program, I think, is a good program to discuss with that broader view in mind, because Title 10, Section 4817, which was Section 2508, there was a reorg in the Title 10 recently, is a very broad set of authorities that guide the IBAS program, and the title in statute is Industrial Base Fund. We like to say you could almost drive a truck through these authorities. That's a good thing because it gives us a lot of maneuvering room. And you can see the kind of the mission and vision statements on the left side. I think the vision, the ability to forge emerging sectors and fortify traditional capabilities to respond at will to national security requirements. That some of that, I think, harkens to Arthur Herman's book, Freedom's Forge, which I would hope that a lot of you have read. And so we want to match the World War II's industrial dominance of the United States, yet we don't want to turn back the clock and try to relive that experience, because we recognize the completely different geopolitical environment of the 21st century. So we still want the ability to respond at will as an industrial base, but we have to recognize the entirely different the entirely different landscape that we're operating in. You see the priorities on the right, none of which should be too surprising with you. Prepare the defense industrial workforce is a major priority of the office. Ready the modern defense industrial base. So we have to look at the traditional defense manufacturing sectors. You know, the research and engineering undersecretariat is focused on what's coming over the horizon, new technologies, technology deployment. That's a subset of our view of the industrial base. The other big view is the traditional manufacturing base that's out there, and traditional technologies that we have to make sure are healthy. But then preparing for the future and working closely with the research and engineering community and the services is important to us. And we are always looking at what are the most critical risks that are there that need to be mitigated in the supply chains across the global defense industrial base. And we leverage and strengthen partnerships. Partnering is an essential theme. Public-private partnering, we can't go it alone as a federal government. Industry can't. There are many things beyond the risk of industry. We have to partner. Hence why I'm on this call with you right now. So let's go to the next slide and a little more on the IBAS program. You know, we are a team of primarily generalists, but we do have some subject matter technical experts, but we are mostly engineers and generalists in the office of about 20 people now. But we do leverage the service subject matter experts and the experts across the Office of the Secretary of Defense and across the federal government. We like to believe that we have earned and we keep the trust of those we work with. We talked about the authorities that we leverage. As far as stimulating and amplifying investments, we believe we need to get in, catalyze, and then get out in a graceful extraction from you know, an investment space, so that things become sustaining on the industry side. We have operated where we sustain, expand, or create across traditional sectors that you see there, and those are part of the EO 14017 framework that we talked about. And then the second sub-bullet under operate, this ungoverned space, we like to say, we look for ungoverned space where there is no clearly identified lead in the Defense Department, particularly where everybody can kind of point left and say it's somebody else's problem, and so therefore it's no one's the leader. And so we try to bring order to chaos. We believe that the Industrial Basse Analysis and Sustainment Office is good as a defense industrial utility infielder, so to speak, to look for those problem areas. So workforce is one of those classic large cross-cutting spaces that needed some order to the chaos. And we believe the national imperative is a nice coalescing framework to do that. America's cutting edge is another area where we recognized that the machine tool industry, the machine tool sector, advanced machining and traditional machining is something that if you don't have it, there's a lot of flywheel capability that you lose. And so we have had a precipitous fall from the number one machine tool producer many decades ago to we're now number 5. We're now the number 3 user of advanced machine tools in the world compared to a higher standing earlier. So we're trying to bring that back. We think that's essential and there's a complementary relationship with workforce. Other ungoverned or other areas where there is perhaps stovepipes of activity, you think about common architectures for radar systems across the Army and the Navy and the Air Force. Perhaps there's too much redundant investment in radars where some of the common architectures could be brought together more coherently. Capital and equity markets is another open frontier, and access to capital, government funds, private equity, venture capital, other sources of capital. What are the barriers to small businesses and even mediums to getting access to necessary capital? So we keep that as a focus as well. So next slide, please. How we execute in IBAS. We have established what we're calling Cornerstone, which is a government operated a consortium of the membership is over 700 people now. Hopefully many of you on this call are members. There's no fee to join, and it's managed by our field activities at Rock Island under DevCom, and we leverage 10 U.S. Code 4022 prototyping authorities to basically underpin a lot of the investments, because prototyping business processes in this space is very appropriate for much of what we do. So I'll just encourage you, if you're not a member, to join the IBAS Cornerstone Consortium. Much of our investment run through Cornerstone. There are standing Cornerstone initiative requests, CIRs, that are out there. Workforce is one of them, but there are others, and broad area and broad agency announcements that Cornerstone releases that you can submit white papers and proposals against. Some of the RFPs have a shelf life and a deadline for submission. Others are open, like the workforce. It's open for 5 years. We have other vehicles that the IBAS program leverages. GSA, FedSim, other military service program management and contracting field agencies work with us and support us. PEO STRI and ACC Orlando, for example, and we are building other transaction vehicles. So we're increasingly leveraging other platforms. Next slide, please. So that gets to this theme of a federated approach that we utilize. I just mentioned several of the field activities that are in the boxes at the top. Navy, Naval Surface Warfare Center Crane, we use them for some of our investment activity, AFRL, of course, Army DevCom I mentioned. So, and if you look down on this slide, at the bottom large hot dog of boxes captures all of the industrial-based sectors and communities of interest that we tend to bin our investments in, and the ones in blue are the ones that are currently receiving money, but the ones in white are fair game as well. So enough on that slide. Looking at the clock, I've only got about 8 minutes left here. So if we could go to the next slide. I just want to briefly touch on, and there are so many project successes that are coming out of IBAS. These are just, I want to highlight just 4. This top one is a completed project where we recognize that we were overly dependent on foreign sources for large cast and forged products, which were foundational to defense systems and platforms. And so we partnered with Rolls-Royce Marine to manufacture items that it currently outsources, like stainless steel parts and centrifugally cast controllable pitch propeller hubs. And so we invested in that, and it was really mitigated our foreign dependency on a highly technical set of processes for manufacturing propellers and propeller hubs. The next, that's a closed out project, by the way. The next one is an ongoing a project on electron beam welding where we brought in a highly sophisticated electron beam welder into the Huntsville area, teamed with Dynetics to really with a focus on supporting the shipbuilding needs as an alternative to traditional arc welding, which is slow, low quality. This electron beam welder, once it's in place, will really help the Columbia-class submarine production in cost and schedule. And so that's an ongoing effort, and it's on track. Next slide, please. So we felt that, we teamed with Constellium and really upgraded and tore down and modernized a very 50s era mill to upgrade how we maneuver and mill and roll aluminum, sheet aluminum, and all of the mechanical, electrical, hydraulic processes and control systems that go with that. So I'm just trying to give you a flavor for some of the technology areas that we move into in supply chain risks. The next project is all about recognizing that our domestic capability to manufacture small caliber armor piercing ammunition had really gone stagnant, and so we made a little more than a $10 million estimate, investment in advanced machine tools and materials and to improve soldier lethality. Next slide, please. So those were some technical investment examples. Now the national imperative for industrial skills, which is kind of my wheelhouse and what I'm charged by Adele Ratcliffe to oversee. So this again recognizes that there's this large cross-cutting and EO 14017 recognized challenge area within the defense industrial base, both on the organic side, defense employees, but primarily on industry side is we have critical skilled workforce gaps and shortages existing and forecast that we need to deal with, or we're going to significantly impact the production and sustainment of our key weapon systems. We've always traditionally in the Defense Department focused on workforce needs that are tied more to the four-year engineering tracks, and our alarm bells go off more quickly when those skills aren't being satisfied. But on the industrial skills shop floor side of the house, it's more insidious, yet the problem is bigger. And so that's what this national imperative for industrial skills is all about. The lower left-hand corner just captures a simple, but we think an elegant graphic that talks about, that captures the entire workforce development, industrial workforce development ecosystem of challenges. You've got the kind of the four-year track on the top and the two-year track on the bottom of the two-year CTE pipelines, whether it be community colleges or the VOTEC systems. You've got the left side K through 12 feeder, and then you've got industry on the right as a draw. But this is the basis for that standing solicitation, and we've invested roughly $130 million against this effort, and it's growing. It's growing significantly. We're becoming victims of our own success, actually, candidly, much of this was based on congressional ads initially, but inside the building, CAPE and the comptroller and others have recognized the value, because Congress kept sending strong demand signals saying this national imperative thing, this makes all kinds of sense. So now we've laid in, for example, $750 million in the program starting in 23 to help the Navy in particular buy down the risk in its workforce and needs to sustain Columbia class nuclear sub production, as well as Virginia class and the sustainment of those as well. But if I take a step back from workforce, I would say overall, the IBAS program is a victim of its own success, where the fiscal 23 president's budget has roughly $2.5 billion laid in against the IBAS program to meet not just workforce, even though we're on this workforce slide, but all of the technical areas and all of the supply chain risk areas that we've been talking about, castings and forgings, battery storage, critical strategic materials, microelectronics, hypersonics, on and on. And so the IBAS program is proving to be a very powerful investment line within industrial base policy. Next slide, please. And I'm going to have to speed through these. This, I'll just say, is a graphic laydown of the physical geographic distribution of the national imperatives investments. But I'll ask you to just take some more time to study that. There are several investments that directly play into the theme of this summit, including Interdisciplinary Center for Advanced Manufacturing Systems at Auburn University, Systems Engineering Technician Program, also at Auburn, Project MFG, skills competitions in advanced machining, Vermont Technical Manufacturing Collaborative, and the focus on additive manufacturing and advanced manufacturing systems and training our workforce for that. And then the AceNet, which I'll talk to in another slide here briefly. So again, for time reasons, we'll just move on to the next slide. And the next slide is a focus on what is one of our flagship and charter efforts within the National Imperative for Industrial Skills, and it's called Project MFG, which is based on skills competitions, and it helps the recruiting functions of the workforce development ecosystem, regional training development, and economic development of communities around the country. So these skills competitions are ways to incentivize behaviors and recruit. It's, if you were to take an analogy of, say, the Fortnite gaming industry, where they have they have competitions, and they put millions of dollars in prize money against that. Well, that's Fortnite, that's gaming. How about we think about and focus on manufacturing and industrial needs for this country and do something similar? And so we're starting to do that, and this is a wildly successful program that's just growing leaps and bounds. And for example, the last national competition, we awarded $100,000 to the winning team of 4 people at a community college. So it's making an immediate impact. Next slide, please. This is America, and by the way, this is the last slide before I get to the summary, so I'm going to go a minute or two long. But this is another big cross-cutting area that has both workforce components, but a larger view of restoring the U.S. machine tool prominence. And the IBAS program is investing heavily in this. We are teamed with the Department of Energy and the Oak Ridge National Labs and the manufacturing demonstration facility there in Knoxville. And let me just say that this is a growing, exciting area where we are trying to put America back on the map near the top of the list in U.S. machine tool prominence. We are going up against a strong international market, but we think it's so essential that we do this. And by restoring our prominence, both as a producer of machine tools and as a user of advanced machine tools, we think there are multiple secondary benefits and flywheel benefits from this effort for the Defense Department and for the nation. So that's all I'll say at this point. Next slide, and this is our summary. Might get off the stage. So as I said, we have these very broad authorities in the IBAS program to achieve national security. We are part of an integrated investment strategy within the industrial base support and the DPA Title III program. We have significant investment growth that are tied to EO 14017 as we look to fiscal 23 and beyond. And we are we recognize that we're a small office in OSD, and we have to partner and leverage with the military services and the defense agencies to really put together a broad attack against these multiple supply chain risk areas, and including transformation to Industry 4.0 and the digitizing our manufacturing and industrial sectors. So we're part of a broader industrial-based policy enterprise that's supporting the U.S. industrial dominance and resilience in the 21st century. And we think we're doing right by the taxpayer and by you, and we look forward to working with you in the future. So that's it for me.